I just thought I'd sneak in here and because I knew some people would be watching it. I knew you'd be right out there. Listen, so if you heard any of that, you know that I'm sorry I haven't been able to do uh, these talks for the last 2 weeks because I'm on a book tour and I, I am scheduled within an inch of my life, let me tell you. But I just did want to pop in and tell you that I will keep doing these. And there were some things I thought really should be talked about today. And one of them, there's a lot of them actually. There's a lot of good stuff happening, a lot of bad stuff happening, but one of there's just some pieces I want you to remember for the next week that'll really help. There has been a horrific attack on a hospital in Gaza. Lots of people dead, and by the rules of war, nobody's supposed to attack civilians, and certainly not a hospital. The reason I'm mentioning that right now is that it is a horrific attack. But here's the key: it happened, I think, within an hour of me doing this. The only people we have right now that I have seen saying what happened are, on the one hand, officials in the Gaza Strip, and on the other hand, Israelis. And something happened. There's no doubt about that. But do not trust anybody, including me, telling you what happens within an hour of something happening, especially in a war zone. So this event has happened, but it's a great moment to recognize the dangers of people who are either trying to spin something or trying to make sure they get the story, because we don't know what the story is. The story, who is responsible for that is important, and we just don't know yet. And if you read, it's really interesting because I've actually spent the last half hour here reading different stories, and many people are taking either side at face value on that, and we just don't know. I'm not for or against anything. We simply don't know. So it was just a great example of how often you just don't know. Now so be aware of that, and that's going to happen not only over things in the war, but also in many other things, especially in the United States, which is really all I can talk about. Um, there is a real desire to spin the news ahead of time to make things a self-fulfilling prophecy. So, for example, going into last night, when we were looking forward to today, there were a lot of reports that Ohio Representative Jim Jordan, a Republican who was trying to get the speakership of the House of Representatives, had the votes he needed. Well, it turns out he didn't have the votes he needed. And he was doing something else with that announcement, and that was to try and pressure the reluctant Republicans to back him. And he and his allies have put a really heavy pressure campaign on Republican holdouts. And there's a number of reasons that Republicans want to hold out. There are 18 members of the House of Representatives who are Republicans who are in seats that President Biden won in 2020. So they won in 2022, but obviously their seats are not secure. And Jim Jordan does not have ties to the traditional pro-business wing of the party, and he doesn't have ties to the real fundraisers. That is, the people who really provide the money for, rank and file Republicans tend to be business people. And Jordan is such a flamethrower, keeps trying to shut down the government and make the government default. They don't like him. So a lot of people, regardless of the positions anybody takes, don't want Jordan in that chair because it's going to hurt their fundraising. And so they're not behind him, and he's really trying to force them to get behind them. And if you're one of those 18 Republicans, if you back Jordan, you're almost certain to get kicked out in 2024. And so, what do you do? So what he's doing is he's trying to have his allies threaten them with primarying, with, making their lives difficult, with all sorts of different things. So that dynamic is also going on right now. But then there's another really interesting dynamic in the House race. And it is that if, Jim Jordan is a key ally of Donald Trump. And when I say key ally, the reason I keep talking about what Liz Cheney, former Representative Liz Cheney, a Republican from Wyoming, has said is because she, of course, was very aware of what was happening around January 6th and around the attempt to undermine the results of the 2020 presidential election. And she has come right out and said in the last not few weeks, it's only 2 weeks, in the last 2 weeks, she has come out and articulated that Jim Jordan, who we know talked to former President Trump for about 10 minutes on the morning of January 6th, was instrumental in trying to representing the Congress and trying to get the Congress to overturn the results of that election. If you remember, part of the idea was to create two sets of electoral votes, one of which was real, one of which was fake, and then try and get Mike Pence to say, well, these are confusing, I don't have any idea, so we're going to throw it to the House of Representatives. And because there were more, which was what the Constitution called for, and because there were more Republican states and Democratic states, and every state gets a single vote, that would mean that Trump would get elected. And Jordan was deeply part of that. He was all over that. So for a lot of even Republicans, the idea of going into the 2024 election with essentially Trump running as the candidate, and I'll say more about that in a second, and Jim Jordan as essentially Trump running the House of Representatives, with his track record of repeatedly shutting down the government if he doesn't get everything he wants. They don't want to do that. Aside from, and I'm only talking about political considerations. I'm not talking about their potential concerns about democracy. Imagine what the American people who have never elected Donald Trump to anything. Remember, he has continually lost the presidential vote. He has lost 2 midterm elections, now has 91 counts against him, and is completely melting down. Imagine going before the American people like that. It would look like a complete rout. And so a lot of normal Republicans are looking at this going, I don't want any part of this. Just count me out, because what the answer here is, and it's so frustrating because it's so freaking close. It's what Hakeem Jeffries keeps saying. Lots of people are misinterpreting what Jeffries is saying when he talks about him being, about a compromised speaker. They think he means himself. And that would just be, it's not impossible for there to be a switch like that, but it's unbelievably improbable. What Jeffries is asking for, and Hakeem Jeffries of New York is the minority leader of the House of Representatives. What he keeps saying is that, listen, if you will agree only to this is what we want. We want you, as the Speaker of the House, to guarantee that if a vote has a majority of the House behind it, that is Democrats as well as Republicans, it can come up for a floor vote, which sounds like an absolute no-brainer. But the Republicans since the 1990s have had this crazy internal rule. It's not official, but it's a rule that unless a majority of the Republicans wants it, they won't bring it up for a vote. So all sorts of popular legislation can't be passed because the House is so evenly divided, because the Republicans won't bring it up for a vote. And so what Jeffries is saying is, that's all we want. Just bring the stuff up for a vote. Ukraine funding is incredibly popular. There's all kinds of other stuff that's very popular as well. But that alone is a great example. Funding the government, the debt ceiling, all that stuff is incredibly popular. But the Republicans stop it by refusing to bring it up for a vote. So Jeffries is saying, if you will simply tell us that you will bring things up for a vote, the Democrats will help you elect a more moderate speaker, and a Republican. Pick one. We don't care. Just make sure it's somebody who is willing to work with us in this very basic way. That's all he wants. It would take 5 Republicans to do that. And they are so far refusing to do it, which is simply mind-boggling, and speaks, I think, to the pressure campaign that the far right, run by people like Jordan, is putting on them, because basically they can expect to be stripped of committee assignments, which will make it hard to get reelected. They can expect to lose fundraising. They can expect a lot of negative things. On the other hand, observers suggest that if, in fact, Jordan gets in that chair, a lot of them are just simply going to leave and going to resign, or decide not to run again for office, because they know they're going to get slaughtered in an election. So So it's a really interesting calculation. That being said, right now, um, uh, the the fact that we have 200 members of the House of Representatives who were willing to vote for Jordan is appalling. Aside from the fact he is allegedly, and the there's a lot of evidence, and his own behavior suggests there's a lot of evidence, deeply involved in the cover-up scandal of sexual assault at the university he was at. That's right there a big enough problem, and a weird one for the Republicans to sign on to, because they had another wrestling sex scandal under Denny Hastert, who was the House Speaker in the 90s. It's just weird. I mean, how many? I mean, I'm not going to get into that. I don't know about wrestling, but I just think it's kind of weird that here's another one. And aside from that, there is this issue of just how closely tied to President Trump Jordan is, because essentially what the House is doing, and what they're talking about right now, is putting Trump people in charge of the entire government, which is why people like me have our hair on fire. Now, that's not the whole thing. I mean, they don't have the Senate, which is Democratic, and they don't have the White House, which is President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. But it's a big deal to essentially gut the Republican Party and put Trump in at the presidency and Jordan at the Speaker of the House. And the fact that they are willing to do that says basically that the Republican Party has given up on democracy, which is, again, I've said that before, but it never ceases to surprise me, because people talk about their cowardice, and I get it. But then you look around us and you see how many people are doing really courageous things. I mean, those kids in Tennessee, I'm sorry, they're grown men, but they're one of them is literally younger than my own children, are standing up to the Tennessee legislature and to white supremacy across the nation. And they're in their 20s, for God's sake. And then you have all these people who've been in public office for all these years, and are they frightened of Jim Jordan or Donald Trump? I find it mind-boggling, especially when they're boasting about how manly they are. I'll stop. All right. So what we're seeing, I think, in this fight is a little bit of a microcosm of the 2024 election and what the Democrats have done, especially Representative Aguilar, when he was nominating Hakeem Jeffries, the Democratic minority leader, for his own side, is he started to list all the things that are against Jordan. Not only he didn't talk about the sex scandal, not only the fact he was so deeply involved in January 6th, not only that he refused to answer subpoenas, but also that he has tried to put through Congress a draconian anti-abortion law saying that life starts at conception. Even before implantation, which is just about as radical as you can get. He has called for the end, I think he's called for the end of same-sex marriage. He has repeatedly talked about cutting back the federal government in ways that Americans really don't like. And you could just see him listing this as if he were sort of saying, get ready, because if you nominate this guy and you put him in the chair, we're going to be out there in front of the American people talking like this for the next year or whatever it is. So Republicans, again, are listening to that and thinking, do I really want to run if the Democrats are quite justifiably out there talking about my party this way? And their only response is like Kevin McCarthy today and Elise Stefanik, who's number 3 in the House, trying to say, well, it's all the Democrats' fault. It's like, what are you talking about? Like, it's not the Democrats' fault. This is entirely internal. And you are deliberately doubling down on your very small base, and throwing the rest of us overboard. And it's fascinating to watch, because and you probably aren't, this is kind of my job now. If you're watching Donald Trump, you can see he is completely melting down. I mean, which I've said for a while, but I mean, he can't put a sentence together, and he doesn't have whatever you thought of him, he was really good with the crowd in 2016. And now it's just sort of this constant stream of non sequiturs, and he can't pronounce words, and he gets very caught up in his own anger, and it's not going to play well if he indeed gets the nomination. And if he doesn't, it's unlikely that it would go to a Trump-like character, maybe, but it's unclear which way that somebody should jump in terms of. I mean, you look at Elise Stefanik, for example. She was elected as a moderate, decided Trump was the future, became a hardcore Trumper, and now she's in real trouble. Had she continued to sort of stay out of the wings as a moderate, she might be able to have preserved her career even if Trump goes down. And as it is, she will go down with him because she is now so closely tied to him. So I think this is what we're seeing right now, which is just really interesting. So I'm really sorry, by the way, that I can't do a whole lot today because, as I say, I have to be out of here by 4:30. But there was one other thing I wanted to watch. One of the things really quickly that is, and I will write more about it. A couple of things about that. People have repeatedly asked me to write a history of the Middle East and the different conflicts in the Middle East. And I'm sorry, I do read a lot about this. I am not qualified to do that. I'm an Americanist. I can write about anything America. And as you know, what I'm doing when I do talk about other countries is talking about their relationship to the United States, because that's what, and it's just not a question of reading the facts. I mean, yeah, I can go on anything and read the facts. If you really study a country, first of all, you need to have all the languages. But second of all, countries have their own beating heart. And if you don't know that, you misread things. And I don't know the beating heart of the different countries that are involved in the Middle East. So I will continue to write what happens during the day of that day, but I cannot say to you, that Palestinians care deeply about this particular cultural figure in this way, the way I could say that about, for example, the way people in the United States feel about LBJ, because I don't have that. So that being said, it is really important to remember that there are many moving pieces in the global arena, because we are at the end of this post-World War II global, wasn't a consensus, but a global world, this idea in which there were a number of superpowers that kind of kept a lid on things, while there might be, and there were, regionalized wars. There were not giant fights. And what we're seeing right now is the United States and NATO and its allies and its partners are trying desperately to hang on to the idea of a rules-based international order. And what that means is that through a series of treaties and documents and meetings, a number of countries came together and said, here are the rules we're all going to operate by. Two things about that. One, it was always aspirational, because you say that to people and like, well, the US did this and the US did. Absolutely true. But it's rather like saying, people break the US laws all the time, so we should get rid of the US laws. And that's not my idea of what happens. I don't think that's a good thing to happen. So they were this set of rules. That being said, they were problematic from the start in that they were largely, and they've been expanded since, but largely wealthier nations that were imposing their view on places like the global South. Well, now, one of the things that the Biden administration is trying to do is get away from that and to include the global South and to include Africa, not least because those are the regions that will be hardest hit by climate change. And they're a little sick of being told what to do, with great justice. So while there is this group of people that are trying to protect that idea, there's another group of people who are trying to destroy it because they say it is obsolete. And those are places like Russia. This morning, in which the Ukrainians blew up two Ukrainian, by the way, they're Russian occupied airstrips and 9 Russian helicopters those sorts of hits really matter. And the Black Sea Fleet had to pull out of Sevastopol, which was again in Ukraine, which was the Crimean part of Ukraine. Those things matter. So what Russia desperately needs now is for the United States to stop backing Ukraine. Because if the United States will pull back from Ukraine, and the alliances and the partnerships that the United States has helped to glue together around the world to support Ukraine and to support the idea of this international rules-based order, if that falls apart and the Americans keep squabbling amongst themselves and they pull back from NATO, and and the stalemate goes on long enough that Russia can keep hammering on Ukraine so it runs out of people and it runs out of munitions, then that vision in which might makes right can do things like take over the very valuable Ukrainian ports and the places in Ukraine that produce so much food. That's the land in Ukraine is known as the world's breadbasket, and that really matters if you're trying to create an empire, as somebody like Putin is trying to do. So to tie all this together, and one of the things I really haven't been able to articulate well enough in the 1,200 words I try to allot myself every night, is Speaker Jim Jordan, who has, if he becomes Speaker, has said he doesn't want to keep funding Ukraine. And while they are trying in the radical right to frame that as, well, that's just too much money, that's a lie, because the spending on Ukraine is just 5% of our military budget. Now, we can have a larger discussion about what it's worth looking at is trying to remember that, and I know it's really complicated, and that's why I really try, even though I'm on this tour and exhausted, I've really been trying to keep my hand in every night, is there's so many moving pieces. I know it's exhausting, but they're not different stories. They're all the same story. At the end of the day, they are all the same story about whether or not the world should be ruled in such a way that everybody is created equal and has a right to have a say in their government and to be treated equally before the laws, or whether a few people are better than the rest of us and have the right and maybe the duty to rule over us. And that's with keeping in mind, as we get more and more information coming at us from more and more different places, that, and where I started, do not trust anything you hear or see until it has been verified by a number of independent journalists. And by independent journalists, I mean, newspapers, The Guardian, the New York Times, and not just them. That's just what's off the top of my head, because I saw a report in The Guardian that I think is incorrect. No, The Guardian was right. It was the Times took Gaza officials at their word. And they might be right, but it was a guess, because we don't have confirmation of that yet. So in these next, and similarly, if you listen to the news last night, it looked like Jim Jordan was a shoe-in today, and he has lost the first vote. He's going to keep pressuring people as we go into more votes. So we don't know what's going to happen. But do not assume that anybody, including me, is getting it right unless there is independent verification from at least 3 sources. It takes me 3 sources before I will say, yes, that's correct. Except I have made the mistake on Twitter of retweeting people I trust, only to find that they were wrong. And so I've pulled it all back. But so even on Twitter, I screw up. I try really hard not to screw up in the newsletter. I almost did last night. I wrote a story that turned out to be fake because I'd seen it in a couple of places. So just take a deep breath if you can, because we are, I guess, in a way at war, but the war is for people's minds. And the best possible thing you can do, not to be a combatant and really to be trying to make things right, is to make sure that what information you are going forward with is accurate. And the disinformation out there, especially because of the collapse of Twitter, is just bonkers. So, all right, that's all I got for you today because I got to go do something else. But I'm this all slows down, stops something soon. And that being said, once again, I just can't thank you all for the response to this book. I truly had no idea. I write in a storeroom, and I was just writing like I always write, and I didn't know how people were reacting either to me or to my work, and it does really feel like we're kind of getting it right. And there's an awful lot of us out here. So it's been quite a tour. Anyway, so thank you very much, and I will go get ready for this event here. Thank you for being here, and we'll get back on a normal schedule when all this is over in the next week or two. Thank you for being here.